Hey guys, I'm back. It's time for another Grow Group Help. This time we're going to be in Second Thessalonians 2 1 through 12. Um, just want to give you a heads up. This is a very difficult passage to walk through. It's funny because I asked Sam Rivera to teach for me this week, and I'm sure he's probably like, what did I get myself into? So I'm thankful he's going to teach this week, but I did want to give you a couple things to think on. And I'll give you a part two that will be helpful to where I'll touch on verse 13 in chapter 2 through verse 5 in chapter 3. That'll be one section, and we'll teach that on April 27th. But for this coming week on April the 13th, we see a clear picture of the reasoning behind why the people of Thessalonica should not be deceived and they should not be worried. They were filled with a lot of worry over the second coming still, even though Paul had spoke extensively about it. What's interesting enough is Paul does not really go into humongous detail with us. He basically gives us some key points of what the future will look like for those people, but he doesn't really give us as readers a lot to take away from it. So it's a very difficult passage, and a lot of people have a lot of different debates on what the text means and what it could mean. One thing I would encourage you with this one is I think there's multiple layers to this. I don't think it's just one layer. So don't think of this passage as just a futuristic passage of like, for instance, that this passage talks about the Antichrist and only the Antichrist figure that will come in the last days. I think that is part of it. I'm not saying it isn't. But also, there was a lot of fulfillment that happened in their time as well. You see a lot of multiple fulfillment prophecies being taken or taking place in this passage. So you could say some of it's been fulfilled, but not all of it's been fulfilled. There's still an awaiting for an ultimate fulfillment, which that's with everything in the Bible. When you look at some things that have been fulfilled and some things that are waiting to be fulfilled, it's this mindset of you got to remember the already not yet aspect of Scripture. So here's a couple points I would take away from verses 1 through 12 of chapter 2 is that deception is prevalent in a fallen culture with fallen humans. These people were filled with anxiety and worry because they felt like the day of the Lord had already occurred. And Paul's like, in verse 5 of chapter 2, he says, don't you remember that when I was with you, still with you, I used to tell you about this? And so he's like, guys, I've spoken to you about this already. And then he gives them some key things that must happen in order for this to take place. Number one, he says that this person that's supposed to come, this man of lawlessness, which some have termed to be the Antichrist figure in this passage, he opposes and exalts himself above every so-called God or object of worship and sits in God's temple. The passage seems to be talking about, when it talks about God's temple, the temple of Jerusalem. That seems to be the closest identifying marker with that verse. But some of that was already partially fulfilled in Antigonus Epiphanes the fourth, who in 167 BC sacrificed a pig on the altar in Jerusalem's temple and also erected a statue of Zeus. You see that in the book in your Christ-centered exposition. So I find it very interesting that, when Paul says the spirit of this man of lawlessness is already at work, or the mystery of lawlessness is already at work. You look in 1 John. 1 John says the spirit of the Antichrist is already here, or already at work. You basically have this aspect of there's something to come, but yet there's still this aspect of Antichrist work or working going on already. So what do we do with this? I think here's a couple things. Number one, you could say there was some fulfillments in that of the 167 BC thing. I think you've also got to take a clear stance of that throughout history there's been a work of lawlessness amongst humans. And he even makes the suggestion that this is already at work, that Satan's doing his work right now. He's trying to influence those to be against Christ. John speaks about many antichrist in 1 John, so read 1 John on that. His main point is he doesn't want them to be led astray. he says, don't be deceived by any of this false teaching. And so the second thing I want you to take away from this is deception is personified in a fallen leader with false messages and false miracles. This could be the Antichrist that's to come in the end times. This could be Antichrist from the past. If you really think about all the Antichrists that have come that were Antichrist figures. Think about Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler was a very famous guy in Germany, and he had false messages, claimed to be a leader, but he was a fallen leader. And then even some of the things of people believing he had godlike status with his miraculous dealings of trying to eliminate a race. They thought that was miraculous, but it wasn't. So that's something to consider that we've seen over time. But ultimately, there's going to come a day where it's going to all be fulfilled with the ultimate Antichrist to come. What that looks like, I don't know. That's not what Scripture gives us. But what Scripture does say is someone's restraining him. Well, there's a lot of debate on who's restraining him. You read through all these different things in history about Roman government, yada yada yada. God uses different avenues under his power to restrain for a certain period of time. God himself is even restraining the Antichrist, Satan, in his work for a certain period of time until it continues to get worse. And so I think you see that. So I would argue God's the restrainer. He's the one that chooses when and how and why he's going to do those things. But then also we got to deal with the tension, and this will be my last point, is deception is powered by the devil, but God is sovereign even over the good and evil to bring salvation and condemnation. We're going to talk about salvation for chapter 2, verse 13 through chapter 3, verse 5. The condemnation comes on the people because they choose to believe a lie. So there's two aspects to this, and this is a tension we have to deal with in condemnation, is that if you look at verse 10, it says, with every wicked deception among those who are perishing, they perish because they did not accept the love of the truth and so be saved. So they are the exact opposite of those who are being saved. They are the ones that don't accept the message and don't receive it by faith. They reject it and they do not accept the love of God. And then, for this reason, in verse 11, God sends them a strong delusion so that they believe the lie. So what does that look like? Because some people may say, well, is God in charge of people being deluded in their mind, condemned? I do not think God is responsible for sin, but God is definitely sovereign in his permissive will to even when bad things happen, we know that God is still overall in control to coordinate those things and place those things and work out those things in order to accomplish his good plan. Take the cross, for example. The cross was a egregious evil that people brought against Jesus, but God worked through that in his sovereign plan for his good, for his glory, and then for the good of us. No one would say that God wasn't in charge of that. God was definitely in charge of that. And so I think we got to take that into account when we're looking at a passage like this, is that the people are responsible for being deluded in their mind. God has responsibility too, in the sense that he is sovereign over that. And I don't know what that looks like, but at a certain point, they continue to reject God, and God gives them over to their depraved mind, as it talks about in the book of Romans. So those are my 3 points I want you to take away. It sounds really sad, sounds really rough, but that's the reality, the harsh reality of those who continue to not believe the truth and delight in unrighteousness. And so the biggest thing you're going to have to wrestle with your students is, does that describe them? Are they actually aware of the work of the Antichrist and the work of lawlessness that's going on in our culture? Are we the ones that oppose God and exalt ourselves as being Antichrist figure? It's a lot to take in, but I hope this is helpful for your Grow Group help for this week.